In the 2008 presidential election, young voters came out in droves. 4 years later, will history repeat itself? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Comcast Newsmakers On the Vote. I'm Robert Trainum, and I'm joined by Matthew Segal, founder of Our Time. Matthew, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
So the question is whether or not young voters will come out in droves like they did 4 years ago. They came out because they were inspired. They were inspired with hope and change. They were inspired because although Barack Obama was not a member of their generation, he looked like a member of their generation. He was a brown or is a brown person. He is a young or was a young person running for president. And he kind of walked the walk and talked the talk as it relates to young people from an aspirational standpoint. 2012, will we do the same thing again?
Well, I think 2012 is a unique year because you've seen since President Obama took office a lot get done, but at the same time a recession and job situation that hasn't necessarily improved dramatically by any means. And when recent grads of high school and college are faced with the lingering concern of A, will I find a job, and B, will I ever be able to pay back my student debt, they haven't seen the political process and politics in general make big improvements on those issues. And so that's part of it. But the second part of it, you've then seen the development of Occupy Wall Street.
Sure.
And other more grassroots movements demonstrating anger at corporate America and bankers for owning the political process and not having that process be accountable to our generation.
You know, Matthew, let me paint a very grim picture for you.
Sure.
1 in 6 individuals under the age of 30 are unemployed. 1 in 3 lack insurance. You mentioned student loan debt. The average is $24,000 in debt when one gets that little diploma or that degree. It appears that when you take a look at the statistics today for someone under the age of 30, the future is not as optimistic as it was for our parents or maybe for our grandparents.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the future and American dream is becoming harder for most people to attain. And if you look at the notion of upward mobility, people are now talking about the Canadian dream and the European dream because we're becoming a caste system where you're born into a family and your economic opportunity is largely driven by that.
That's interesting.
And
I've never heard of that.
Well, I mean, income inequality, as the president called it, is becoming truly one of the defining issues of our generation, and certainly is an issue we're going to have to work on in terms of how are we going to provide more people with access to college, how are we going to give every person who wants a job, and how are we going to make young people who want to start businesses and innovate actually have the assistance and the capacity to do so in a system that is becoming certainly less inclusive for young people who have good ideas and want to bring them into the marketplace, and big businesses who've exerted control over the political process and the tax code to actually stifle competition. So it's been an interesting dynamic there, and I think this election is going to be more about, in my opinion, young voters coming out to vote against corporate America rather than worrying about political candidates. And if you actually look, I'll give you another statistic, 4 out of 10 young people don't even identify with political parties. So they're becoming anti-political party because they think the political parties basically monopolize the whole system and cannibalize good ideas and are more about their own self-perpetuation than letting good ideas rise to the top.
It sounds like what's happening is that young voters or young people, if they actually vote, they're becoming anti-establishment, which if you rewind a little bit, that sounds like a little bit of our parents' generation in the 1960s and early 70s, almost this counterculture revolution. Do you think something like that is on the cusp of happening again with young people?
Well, there's an interesting dichotomy there because you note anti-establishment. Young people are actually very trusting of government. What they're not trusting of is the corporate influence over government.
Okay.
And the fact that government has become an institution that has lost its accountability to the broad majority of us. But that said, they view government as a place whose fundamental purpose is to provide for the safety and security of citizens, to provide access to public services and goods and education, and they don't necessarily want to burn the place to the ground for that purpose. They want to make sure that the institution can work and ensure the same equal access to opportunity that previous generations have had.
You know, Matthew, speaking of previous generations, you know, from an aspirational standpoint, at least we Americans, it seems like when you take a look at our grandparents' generation, there was an FDR to kind of lead us into where we needed to go out of the Depression and win the World War II. There was an aspirational moment there. When you take a look at our parents' generation, there was John F. Kennedy that says by the end of this decade, we will put someone on the moon. Fast forward to today, is there an aspirational person out there that kind of unites us and kind of pushes us into the future?
Yeah.
Is that a Barack Obama? Is that a Sarah Palin? Is that who is that, if anyone?
I would step out of the political forum and say it's probably someone closer to Lady Gaga or Jay-Z or some of these cultural leaders.
Stop there for one second. And I don't mean to be flippant here,
Sure.
but do you honestly believe that a Lady Gaga or some other pop culture, from an aspirational standpoint, can actually lead a group of people to the next level?
I absolutely think so, because culture leads politics. And if you look at what's on TV today, and take someone like Lady Gaga and her work on the LGBT movement, for instance,
and for those of the folks at home, that's gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender.
Sure, the gay rights movement, essentially. What she has done by being someone who's spoken out on that issue, both in her music, both in her concerts, and just in general, is she's been able to translate a complex issue, break it down, and explain to her fans why she views this as something that's anti-American, and she's built a movement. And whether you disagree or agree with the issue, she has moved the needle. She has more Facebook fans than Barack Obama. She has more Twitter followers than any politician, and probably most members of Congress combined. So, I mean, you take a person like her influence you can't ignore. And even though you might say she has no place in the public discourse, what we've realized, and what my organization, ourtime.org, has realized, is if you do not leverage culture, you do not leverage social media and celebrity and athletes and musicians who people are born looking up to, then you're never going to be able to speak to our generation in a credible way to get them involved in the political process so that we can then begin to learn the issues more and take ownership of our future. And that's the reality of the situation.
We got about 45 seconds left, Matthew. Are you saying that a Lady Gaga has more influence than our current president of the United States when it comes to influencing public opinion?
I'm saying she has a great deal of influence in reaching young people, probably better than the president can on a day-to-day level.
Is that a good thing or bad thing?
You know, I think it's a sign of the times. I don't necessarily think we should judge where culture's moving. I think we should leverage culture appropriately. Last thing I'll say is, in terms of that aspirational moment, young people want a major Job Corps. That's what we're aspiring for. Every young person who wants to work and wants to serve and wants to show their dedication to making a living and building a family ought to be able to find a job. No one's lazy in our generation. They want to work and ought to have the right to.
Matthew Segal, founder of Our Time, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And of course, thank you for joining us for this edition of Comcast Newsmakers On the Vote. I'm Robert Trainum. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.